Hey fam! So, last time we talked about some of my favorite witchy nonfiction books. If you haven't seen that video, feel free to go check it out. It's the one I did right before this one. But for today, I figured it would be really fun to go over some of my favorite witchy fiction books. But I'm also including a few books in here that I have not yet read. They're just on my to be read list. But I'm including them because I wanted to mainly throw some books out there that are not so much a fantastical or whimsical idea of witchcraft, like not something like Harry Potter or Charmed, right? I'm talking about more historical fiction that approaches witchcraft from a more traditional sense, much closer to what it very likely really looked like. So, yeah, I'm really stoked to talk about this with you guys and share some of these book recommends. Let's get into it. All right, y'all. So, the very first book that I'm going to recommend is probably the only one of its type that I have ever read. And it is much more of a historical fantasy, but it is extremely witchy, very pagan. And that would, of course, be The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. This is probably the first book, if not the only book of its type that I have ever come across. If you know anything else similar to this, please let a girl know. But this book is also massive. I am such a huge fan. This one also, and I'm going to get more into this in a second, but it is part of a series. She wrote a handful of prequels. I think that there's at least one more that I don't own that I have also never read called The Priestess of Avalon. But let me tell you about this series, y'all, because it's pretty incredible. This is, The Mists of Avalon specifically, is a retelling of the legend of King Arthur, but from the perspective of the women in his life. So that would be his sister, lover, Morgane, and that would be a variety of other amazing women in his family line. But this tells that story through their eyes, and it is absolutely beautiful and profound and makes me cry every time. And of course, if you are unfamiliar with the Legends of Avalon, which I find unlikely, but if you are, this series goes over basically the founding of Avalon, how it became what it is, and it talks a lot about the birth of the Druidic faith. Again, it is a historical fantasy. None of this is like proven or whatever, but it is a very pagan take on things, and for that, it will always be so special to my heart. Now, I believe, like I said, I have not read the one called Priestess of Avalon. That is the only one in the series I have not read so far. So I feel like I'm going to leave that one out just because I don't know exactly where it falls on the timeline. That being said, the very first one, if you want to get into this series, is called Ancestors of Avalon. And this starts all the way in Atlantis and kind of goes over how the Atlanteans who survived what happened to it actually ended up in what we now know as Great Britain. And it talks about them encountering it goes over the story of them encountering the native, I believe it was the Picts. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. It's been a hot minute since I read this, but oh my God, y'all, the fact that it starts in Atlantis and you are there to experience the fall was really cool. These books are also very heavily into the religion aspect, right? There is a lot of other things that come into play. It is a medieval kind of fantasy story, but obviously King Arthur, all that, but yeah. The next one in this series is called The Forest House. This is quite some time after Ancestors of Avalon, but all of these are talking about kind of the same family line. So good. This book also absolutely devastated me. I don't even remember every aspect to it, but the Forest House basically is a specific place that only priestesses were trained, and it definitely predated discovering Avalon. Then you have The Lady of Avalon, which goes over much more like the founding of Avalon and like the it's basically three different women that you follow in the course of this book, one right after another, and it goes through time a bit, but really, really amazing. And then, of course, you have the Mists of Avalon, which is the book that started the entire series that goes over the story of King Arthur and his sister Morgane. And this one is told through Morgane's eyes predominantly, but she talks about other people in her life as well. So, yeah, if you are unfamiliar with any of these, but really interested in King Arthur and druidry and priestesses and goddess worship and all that stuff in your fantasy, check out this series. It's, y'all, it is a classic. Now, along those same veins, but I believe a little bit more historically accurate as opposed to historical fantasy, would be this one here. This would be Confessions of a Pagan Nun by Kate Horsley. This is one of the ones that's on my TBR that I have not personally read yet. However, I'm really excited to. This is basically about a 6th century Irish nun who is recounting her memories from her very pagan childhood and talking about her mom who knew how to use herbs and heal the sick and all these kinds of things, right? Her very witchy mom. And so I'm really curious to read this. I definitely think it's going to be very informative. But it is also, as you can see, it is a novel. It is not. When I first picked it up, I got real excited because I was like, wait, what? But it is a novel. That being said, it seems like something that is going to be much more on the reality side of the spectrum. So the nun in this story is at the monastery of St. Bridget, and that also caught my eye because for those who aren't aware, Bridget, like the Saint Bridget, used to be the goddess Bridget. And for any of the pagan deities that Catholics could not crush out and demonize and say, oh, you're praying to this evil being, if it was too good of a deity, too helpful of a deity, and too beloved of a deity, they could not just quash them out like that. They had to basically turn them into saints so that they could convert people. And so for those who are unaware, I don't know, I can't remember exactly where it is. Maybe somebody knows and can comment below. But over in Ireland, the flame of Bridget used to be tended by priestesses and was dedicated to the goddess Bridget, and now it is tended by nuns, and they say it is dedicated to Saint Bridget. So basically that flame has been burning since pagan days, and I don't care what they say, it's still to the goddess Bridget. So I'm really excited about this one. Sorry for the side ramble. Let's get to the next one. The next one is also one on my TBR. Now, to be fair, I did start reading this one, I think a few years ago, but I had checked it out from the library, and usually when I check out books at the library, I get so many that I don't ever get through all of them. It's happened a few times. But I ended up finding this at a regional burn I went to last year, and so I got a free copy, essentially, which was great. But that would be The Wise Woman by Philippa Gregory. As I've mentioned before, I'm a big fan of Philippa Gregory, even if I don't necessarily always agree on her takes on things. I do love her writing quite a bit, but I'm not going to have a Philippa Gregory ramble right now. I'm really excited about this one. This is the only book I own by her that is a standalone. I don't believe it's part of any of her trilogies or series or anything. I do have all of her Cousins Warren Tudor novels behind me, actually, but this one is just set, I believe, in the same time period, kind of like 1500s England, and it is about a girl who receives training under a wise woman or a cunning woman, as you know, they might have been called back in the day, and kind of all of the stuff that she goes through. So I'm really excited. This looks like a nice big thick juicy one. All right, so the next one that I'm going to recommend, and the only other one that I have not yet read that I'm going to recommend to y'all because it is on my TBR, is The Devil's Queen by Jeanne Kalogridis. I hope I'm saying that right. Jeanne Kalogridis. This one is a novel of Catherine de' Medici. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Catherine de' Medici was a very notorious queen of France. Obviously, she was a Medici. She has a really interesting story. This woman knew Nostradamus. She was like friends with him. She was known for potentially poisoning people and dabbling in black arts and sorcery and things like this. So while she had a really negative reputation in that kind of department, she was also a really fascinating woman and was willing to go through hell and back for her family. So definitely a very morally gray character. The more that I learn about her, historically speaking, the more I fall in love with her. But I'm very excited because I've never read any historical fiction about her. And yes, this might not be the most witchy of the books that I'm recommending as far as in like a pagan sense, but it's definitely going to have some witchiness in it. As I said, I haven't read it myself, but the reviews that I've seen about it and just from reading the back alone, the amount of stuff, I mean, it's called The Devil's Queen. Come on. We're going to get into some fun stuff. So yeah, and as you can see, this one's a nice juicy book too. I have not personally read anything by Jeanne Kalogridis yet, but I just ordered kind of a handful of her books because she writes a lot about Italian and French Renaissance time periods, so I'm pretty excited to deep dive into her stuff. I hear that she's basically the Philippa Gregory of the Italian Renaissance, so that sounds dope. Probably going to be talking more about her very soon because I just started one of her other books. All right, and the last two that I want to talk to y'all about. I have read one of these, and I am a little over halfway through the other one of these, but I just talked about these, so I'm going to keep it short, but that would be The Lady of the Rivers and The White Queen. These are like the first couple of books in the Cousins War series by Philippa Gregory, and I absolutely love how she weaves the magic of these women and their family line and saying that their ancestors were related to Melusina. This is all stuff that she actually pulled from history and wove into this amazing story. Jacquetta Woodville was accused of witchcraft for real twice in her life. And the only reason she got out of those situations is because she was a duchess, because of the connections that she had with Marguerite of Anjou and all of this. So really, really interesting stuff, as well as her daughter, the White Queen, Elizabeth Grey, Elizabeth Woodville, Elizabeth Grey, eventually became the wife of King Edward IV. And so the way that Philippa Gregory weaves the traditional witchy concepts into, and the beliefs of the time into how these women actually affected real events in the Wars of the Roses is like literally just so believable. The way that she does it, it's like, oh my God, maybe that really is how it happened. At least that's how I see it. That's how I feel about it when I'm reading it. The White Queen, I have not read for several years, but I will say of all the Philippa Gregory books I have read so far, it's definitely probably my favorite. It was really fast and easy to get through because so much interesting stuff happened. Elizabeth Woodville was very relatable to me. Currently, this is the one that I am a little over halfway through now, and I had never read it before, and I'm really, really loving it, you guys. It took me a second. I feel like it's kind of weird getting through this book because Philippa Gregory has a way of like the way that she throws real history in with her story. Sometimes it can like slow the pace down a smidge. Not in all of the books I've read by her, but it definitely happens in this one. But Jacquetta Woodville is such an interesting person, and she's not somebody that I've ever read another book about. But her real life story, she literally was there from the beginning of like Henry the Sixth? I think it was Henry the Sixth. But the Mad King, who was just kind of I don't even know what the word would be. I don't even know if we even today know what was wrong with him exactly, but he was definitely not someone who was capable of being a king. And he is the reason that the Wars of the Roses ended up getting started because of his incompetence. Let's at least say that. But she was basically a handmaiden to, I don't think that's the right word, I apologize. But she was a handmaiden to Marguerite of Anjou, who was Henry VI's queen. She was also pretty much a badass because as soon as her Duke husband ended up passing, she went against all laws of the time and just chose to marry far under her station her husband's squire, who had been her husband's squire, and she married for love. And so that alone is pretty badass in the day. This is definitely a woman who carved her own path. And like I said before, she was accused of witchcraft enough in her life that she was basically a known witch, and the only reason that she got away with it was because of her connections and who she was. So yeah, I'm really loving this so far. This book, like I said, there's a few moments where it gets a little slow for a second, but for the most part, any areas that are discussed, any parts of the timeline that get discussed in this book, as soon as I hit one of those moments, I'm just like eating it up. It's so good. It's really interesting. Like I said, I haven't read too many books personally that go over this time period in history either. So yeah, big fan. If you made it this far, let me know. Have you read any of the books that I discussed? How do you feel about any of them? What would you recommend? I would love to hear recommendations for some witchy historical fiction that you've read that I did not talk about in this video. I'm always on the lookout. Those are definitely some of the things that as soon as I see it on a shelf, I'm going to grab it. So please comment below. I do post minimum once a week. I try for twice a week if I can. So if that sounds interesting to you, please do check out some more of my videos. Like, share, subscribe. For all those who have subscribed, thank y'all so much. Appreciate ya. And I will see y'all very, very soon. Bye.